So with the token added to fetch recipes, obviously we also want to add it to store recipes. Now we can use the same logic we used in fetch recipes in store recipes. But since we're using the Angular HTTP client, we could also use another feature offered by that client. Because what we do here in the end is we manipulate all these outgoing requests in the same way. What could we use here? An intersetter. So let's add such an intersetter here to use that intersetter to manipulate our requests instead of manually doing it twice. I'll add it in the auth folder because I'll name it auth-intersetter.service.ts because it is an authentication-related intersetter. And the class name, therefore, will be auth-intersetter-service. And since I'll plan on injecting something there, let's add injectable like this and import injectable from @Angular core. Now, important, don't add the object with provided in root here because we will provide this differently. As you learned in the HTTP section, we have to provide it such that Angular understands it. Now, this service should implement an interface provided by the @Angular common/HTTP package, and that interface would be the HTTP intersetter interface here. So let's add implements HTTP intersetter here, and that forces us to add an intercept method, and that intercept method actually needs to get two arguments: the request, the HTTP request, which is a generic type of type any, so we don't know which data all the requests will return, and we have next, which is our HTTP handler. And you need to import these types from @Angular/common/HTTP, and definitely watch the HTTP client module to learn more about that. Now there you also learn that you need to return next handle and pass in your request. However, not the request like this, but actually I want to edit the request and add my token. Therefore, let's add a constructor and inject the auth service here, which is of type auth service. And that service needs to be imported. So let's import auth service from /auth service. And with that injected, we can now reach out to the auth service, to the user, which is a subject and therefore an observable, and subscribe to it. Now, we have the same problem as before, though. In the end here, we need to return an observable. This also is an observable, and therefore I'll solve this problem in the same way as before. In the data storage service, we used pipe, take one, exhaust map, and so on. It's pretty much the same now. I'll grab this code here with the exhaust map and the pipe method, and we'll fix it here in a second, and go to the auth intersetter and use this code in that place. Close all parentheses. Import these operators from RxJS, of course. So import take and exhaust map from RxJS/operators so that this works. And now, since we got the user in here, in there we can return next handle request, and we can edit the request based on the user here now. And we return this overall chain, which just as before will be a chain that in the end has this handle observable being returned because we swapped the user observable with that one in the map function here, in that map operator. So all we have to do here now is we have to clone our request and update it. So the modified request is created by calling request clone. And to clone, we can pass in an object where we can update the params by setting them to a new set of HTTP params, which is imported from @Angular/common/HTTP, where we call set and pass in the params. So auth is the name of the param we need, and user.token is the value. Now, of course, we should handle the modified request, and with that, this intersetter should add the token to all outgoing requests. Now let's make sure we provide that token in the app module Here under providers, I want to add a new object where I add the provide keyword and use HTTP intersetters, which is imported from @angular/common/HTTP. This is the identifier for this provider. Then use class, and there I'll use the auth intersetter service. For that, we need to import that service here at the top. So let's import auth intersetter service from the auth folder, and there the auth-intersetter.service file. And last but not least, as you learned, set multi to true to allow for multiple intersetters, even if you're only using one. So now with that, the intersetter is added here. Now we just need to fix the data storage service again, because now we don't need to use the logic we had in there a second ago, because we now moved that into the intersetter. So now we directly return this observable, and we simply call pipe there and pass in map and so on into this pipe. We don't add the params here as well. Now we should use this intersetter for outgoing requests. If we now go to authenticate and we log it again, we get an unknown error. Do you have any idea what could be the reason for that error? It becomes clear if we inspect the outgoing request here. We're trying to log in, so let's retry this here with the cleared request tab. And somehow, no request gets sent at all. So our request fails before it even gets sent. And that is actually stemming from our auth intersetter. Because there, we're using that logic for every outgoing request, including our sign up and login requests. Now, when that happens, what we try to do is we subscribe to the user service and we get null as a user, therefore, because this is what we initialize our user at the beginning. Here it is null when our app loads. So user here is null, and therefore when we try to access the token, this fails because we try to access token on null, this throws an error, and the request doesn't even get sent. How do we work around that? Well, we can add a check here and check if we don't have a user. Then we just return next handle for the original request, so we don't try to modify it. We only try to add the token if we have a user. Alternatively, or in addition, you could also check the URL of the outgoing request and only add the token for specific URLs or exclude certain URLs. But here, this should do the trick already. So now if we try logging in again, this looks way better. And now if I try fetching data, this also still works, but keep in mind that this now uses the intersetter. The advantage of the intersetter now, of course, is that this also automatically works for storing recipes, because this uses the same intersetter automatically. So if I delete a recipe and I click Save Data, you see this also succeeds. Otherwise, we would have an error down there, and we can also prove it by fetching data again. This doesn't change, so we are not fetching a third recipe because we overrode them on the server with our save action. So that's the intersetter in action. Before we move forward and make sure we also store the token in a persistent way on our computer so that it is also there if the app reloads, because at the moment reloading means we lose our state and we're logged out again. So before we take care about that, and before we then also protect certain routes so that we can't even visit /recipes if we're not logged in, before all of that happens, let me make sure that logging out works, so that if I am logged in, clicking the logout button here does log us out. And for that, let's go back to the auth service, and in there where we have sign up and log in, let's add a log out method. And logging out is super simple. In the end, we just use our user subject and we call next and we pass null to set our user to null. That's our initial state, and that's now the state again. And this will make sure that our entire application treats the user as unauthenticated, because that's the logic we used everywhere, and therefore now we should update our UI and also our interceptors will not work correctly anymore for requests that require authentication, which is exactly the behavior we want, because we can't authenticate ourselves anymore. The missing piece, of course, now just is that we link this logout method to our header. There we have that logout button. Let's now add a click listener there and call on logout maybe. And in the header component TypeScript file, we can add on logout here and use the auth service, which we're already injecting, to call logout. And now let's give this a quick try. Let's authenticate, log in, and if I now click logout, this works. One nice thing would be that we are redirected. And now here, I'll not do it in the component, but in my service, because whilst I only have one place for logging in my application, which is the auth component, there are multiple possible sources which could lead to a logout. It's not just the header component. We will also add logic to automatically log us out once the token expired soon. And therefore, I want to redirect here in the logout method in my service, in this method here, and not in a component. So therefore, let me now inject the router here into that auth service. Router, as always, needs to be imported from @AngularRouter. And with the router injected, we can redirect here in the logout method, again, to make sure that no matter how we're logged out, we always redirect the user and we're not stuck on some component on some page where we can't do anything anymore. So there, let's redirect to /auth. I guess this makes sense once we're logged out. Let's give this a final test. If I do log in here and I log out, I'm back on Authenticate. So that is all working, that is all nice. The next mission will be to persist the token so that it is still there once we do reload the app.